The train slowed, shuddered to a halt. Lights, clank of metal. A voice declaring the name of an unknown, never-to-be-visited station. Silence of the night. Rhythm of his breathing. That I should sleep with now for the rest of my life. And I could not sleep. I stealthily sat up, raised the blind a little, and huddled against the cold window that misted over with the warmth of my breathing, gazing out at the dark platform towards those rectangles of domestic lamplight that promised warmth, company, a supper of sausages hissing in a pan on the stove for the station master, his children tucked up in bed in the brick house with the painted shutters. All the paraphernalia of the everyday world from which I, with my stunning marriage, had exiled myself. Into marriage, into exile. I sensed it. I knew it, that henceforth I would always be lonely. Yet that was part of the already familiar weight of the fire opal that glimmered like a gypsy's magic ball, so that I could not take my eyes off it when I played the piano. This ring, the bloody bandage of rubies, the wardrobe of clothes, his scent of Russian leather, all had conspired to seduce me so utterly that I could not say I felt one single twinge of regret for the world of Tartareans in Milan that now receded from me, as if drawn away on a string like a child's toy, as the train began to throb again, as if in delighted anticipation of the distance it would take me. The first grey streams of the dawn now flew in the sky, and an eldritch half-light seeped into the railway carriage. I heard no change in his breathing, but my heightened, excited senses told me he was awake and gazing at me. A huge man, an enormous man, and his eyes, dark and motionless as those eyes the ancient Egyptians painted upon their sarcophagi, fixed upon me. I felt a certain tension in the pit of my stomach, to be so watched in such silence. A match struck. "Soon," he said, in his resonant voice that was like the tolling of a bell, and I felt all at once a sharp premonition of dread that lasted only as long as the match flared, and I could see his white, broad face as if it were hovering, disembodied, above the sheets, illuminated from below like a grotesque carnival head. Then the flame died. The cigar glowed and filled the compartment with a remembered fragrance that made me think of my father, how he would hug me in a warm fog of Havana when I was a little girl, before he kissed me and left me and died. As soon as my husband handed me down from the high step of the train, I smelled the amniotic salinity of the ocean. It was November. The trees, stunted by the Atlantic gales, were bare, and the lonely halt was deserted but for his leather-gated chauffeur waiting meekly beside the sleek black motor car. It was cold. I drew my furs about me, a wrap of white and black, broad stripes of ermine and sable, with a collar from which my head rose like the calyx of a wildflower. I swear to you, I had never been vain until I met him. The bell clanged. The straining train leapt its leash and left us at that lonely wayside halt where only he and I had descended. Oh, the wonder of it! How all that might of iron and steam had paused only to suit his convenience. The richest man in France. "Madame?" The chauffeur eyed me. Was he comparing me to the Countess, the artist model, the opera singer. I hid behind my furs as if they were a system of soft shields. My husband liked me to wear my opal over my kid glove, a showy theatrical trick. But the moment the ironic chauffeur glimpsed its simmering flash, he smiled, as though it were proof positive I were his master's wife. And we drove towards the widening dawn that now streaked half the sky with a wintry bouquet of pink roses, orange of tiger lilies, as if my husband had ordered me a sky from a florist. The day broke around me like a cool dream. Sea, sand, a sky that melts into the sea, a landscape of misty pastels with a look about it of being continuously on the point of melting, a landscape with all the delicrescent harmonies of Debussy, the études I played for him, the reverie I'd been playing that afternoon in the salon with the princess where I'd first met her, among the teacups and the little cakes. I, the orphan, hired out of charity to give them their digestive of music. And his castle. The fairy solitude of the place, with its turrets of misty blue, its courtyard, its spiked gate. His castle, that lay on the very bosom of the sea, with seabirds mewing about its attics, the casements opening onto the green, purple, effervescent departures of the ocean, cut off by the tide from the land for half a day. That castle, at home neither on the land nor the water, a mysterious, amphibious place, contravening the materiality of both earth and the waves, with the melancholy of a mermaiden who perches on her rock and waits endlessly for a lover who had drowned far away long ago. That lovely, sad sea siren of a place. The tide was low. At this hour so early in the morning, the causeway rose up out of the sea. As the car turned onto the wet cobbles between the slow margins of the water, he reached out for my hand that had his sultry, witchy ring on it, pressed my fingers, kissed my palm with extraordinary tenderness. His face was as still as I'd ever seen it, still as a pond, eyes thickly over, yet his lips, that always looked so strangely red and naked between the black fringes of his beard, now curved a little. He smiled. He welcomed his bride home. No room, no corridor that did not rustle with the sound of the sea, and all the ceilings, the walls on which his ancestors in the stern regalia of rank lined up with their dark eyes and white faces, were stippled with refracted light from the waves, which were always in motion. That luminous, murmurous castle. I, the little music student, whose mother had sold all her jewellery, even her wedding ring, to pay the fees at the conservatoire. First of all, there was the small ordeal of my initial interview with the housekeeper, who kept this extraordinary machine, his anchored, castellated ocean liner, in smooth running order, no matter who stood on the bridge. How tenuous, I thought, might be my authority here. She had a bland, pale, impassive, dislikable face beneath the impeccably starched white linen headdress of the region. Her greeting, correct but lifeless, chilled me. Daydreaming, I dared to presume too much on my status. Briefly wondered how I might install my old nurse, so much loved, however cosily incompetent, in her place. Ill-considered schemings. He told me this one had been his foster mother, was bound to his family in the utmost feudal complicity, as much a part of the house as I am, my dear. Now her thin lips offered me a proud little smile, She would be my ally, as long as I was his. And with that, I must be content. But here, it would be easy to be content. In the turret suite he'd given me for my very own, I could gaze out over the tumultuous Atlantic and imagine myself the queen of the sea. There was Bechstein for me in the music room, and on the wall another wedding present, an early Flemish primitive of Saint Cecilia at her celestial organ. In the prim charm of this saint, with her plump, sallow cheeks and crinkled brown hair, I saw myself as I could have wished to be. I warmed to a loving sensitivity that I had not hitherto suspected in him. Then he led me up a delicate spiral staircase to my bedroom. Before she discreetly vanished, the housekeeper set him chuckling with some, I dare say, lewd blessing for the newlyweds in her native Breton, that I did not understand, that he, smiling, refused to interpret. And there lay the grand, hereditary, matrimonial bed, itself the size, almost, of my little room at home, with the gargoyles carved onto its surfaces of ebony, vermilion lacquer, gold leaf, and its white gauze curtains billowing in the sea breeze. Our bed. And surrounded by so many mirrors. Mirrors on the walls, in stately frames of contorted gold that reflected more white lilies than I'd ever seen before. He'd filled the room with them to greet the bride. The young bride. The young bride who had become that multitude of girls I saw in the mirror, identical in their chic navy blue tailor-mades for travelling or walking. A maid had dealt with the furs. Henceforth, a maid would deal with everything. See, he said, gesturing towards those elegant girls, I have acquired a whole harem for myself. I found that I was trembling. My breath came thickly. I could not meet his eye and turned my head away out of pride, out of shyness, and watched a dozen husbands approach me in a dozen mirrors and slowly, methodically, teasingly, unfasten the buttons of my jacket and slip it from my shoulders. Enough, no more. Off comes the skirt, the blouse of apricot linen that cost more than the dress I had for the first communion. The play of the waves outside in the cold sun glittered on his monocle. His movements seemed to me deliberately coarse, vulgar. The blood rushed to my face again and stayed there. And yet, you see, I guessed it might be so, that we should have a formal disrobing of the bride, a ritual from the brothel. Sheltered as my life had been, how could I have failed, even in the world of prim Bohemia in which I'd lived, to have heard hints of his world? He stripped me, gourmand that he was, as if he was stripping the leaves off an artichoke. But do not imagine much finesse about it. This artichoke was no particular treat for the diner, nor was he in any greedy haste. He approached his familiar treat with a weary appetite, and when nothing but my scarlet, palpating caul remained, I saw in the mirror the living image of an etching by Robs from the collection he had shown me when our engagement permitted us to be alone together. The child, with her stick-like limbs, naked but for her buttoned boots, her gloves, shielding her face with her hand as though her face were the last repository of her modesty, and the old monocled lecher who examined her limb by limb. He in his London tailoring, she bare as a lamb chop. Most pornographic of all confrontations. And so my purchaser unwrapped his bargain, and, as at the opera, when I had first seen my flesh in his eyes, I was aghast to feel myself stirring. At once he closed my legs like a book, and I saw again the rare movement of his lips that meant he smiled. Not yet. Later. Anticipation is the greater part of pleasure, my little love. And I began to shudder, like a racehorse before a race, yet also with a kind of fear, for I felt both a strange, impersonal arousal at the thought of love, and at the same time a repugnance I could not stifle for his white, heavy flesh that had too much in common with the armfuls of aurum lilies that filled my bedroom in great glass jars. Those undertaker's lilies with the heavy pollen that powders your fingers as if you had dipped them in turmeric. The lilies I always associate with him, that are white and stain you. The scene from a voluptuary's life was now abruptly terminated. It turns out he has business to attend to, his estates, his companies, even on your honeymoon. Even then, said the red lips that kissed me before he left me alone with my bewildered senses. A wet, silken brush from his beard, a hint of the pointed tip of the tongue. Disgruntled, I wrapped a negligee of antique lace around me to sip the little breakfast of hot chocolate the maid brought me. After that, since it was second nature to me, there was nowhere to go but the music room, and soon I settled down at my piano. Yet only a series of subtle discords flowed from beneath my fingers. Out of tune. Only a little out of tune, but I being blessed with perfect pitch and could not bear to play any more. Sea breezes are bad for pianos. We shall need a resident piano tuner on the premises if I am to continue with my studies. I flung down the lid in a little fury of disappointment. What should I do now? How shall I pass the long, sea-lit hours until my husband beds me? Ugh, I shuddered to think of that.